Welcome to this week's episode of the Ambitious, Awakened, and Aligned podcast. If you've been following along lately, you know that something has been brewing, and I am so excited to share with you exactly what that is. So, what we have coming up is something we've been working on for almost a year. It is a curated, powerful women's leadership and lifestyle festival, and it's going to be hosted at the Pillar and Post in the stunning Niagara-on-the-Lake. Wake the F Up Festival. Whatever the F is, you need to wake up, whether it's fun, focus, freedom, or the other one. We have designed a transformative experience just for you. This isn't just another leadership conference. It's a celebration. It's a breakthrough. And it's coming together as powerful women ready to align your success with true fulfillment. Imagine connecting with like-minded souls, diving deep into professional growth, and walking away not just inspired, but truly awakened. We're talking about electric energy, real conversations, and actionable insights that you can take back into your business and life. We've got an amazing lineup of speakers, including the powerhouse Olympic champion Elizabeth Manley, the unstoppable swagger coach Leslie M., and so many other absolutely powerhouse women who are ready to pour all of their gifts into you. I'll have all the details linked in the show notes, so make sure you check that out after the episode. Trust me, you don't want to miss this. It is time. It is your time to find another way to actually lean into being ambitious, awakened, and aligned. Now, let's dive into today's conversation and keep that momentum going. Let's go! Welcome back to another episode of Ambitious, Awakened, and Aligned. I'm your host, Lori Hawkins, and today we're diving into a topic that is very near and dear to my heart and soul, and that is vulnerability. Wow. This word keeps getting thrown around so much, has really for the last, I want to say, decade. Certainly Brené Brown woke us up to this word vulnerability. And I think most organizations actually believe that they're probably pretty good at it. And I feel like if we just peel back the layers, that what we will actually find is there's still, whether it's subconscious or not, a deep insecurity about being vulnerable because of this bias and perception that it makes us weak. That we can't let people see our deepest truths, or they won't be able to see our greatest strengths. There's something about our human nature that we just aren't sure if we can trust that can coexist, that we can be vulnerable and real and potentially raw, and that we can still achieve great success. And yet, I'm going to share some stories and maybe some insights in this podcast that might help you, recognize, maybe deepen your self-awareness to the fact that you're not maybe playing in vulnerability as much as you think, or also just different perspectives if you actually know that you're not showing up in your most vulnerable self. So I'm going to start with a story of when I first became a leader. And I remember, like it was literally yesterday, how excited I felt and how insecure I felt. And they were equal. There was so many things that I knew I didn't know what I didn't know. And yet I was full of possibility and desire and excitement for supporting our team to explore new possibilities, because we had a team that, quite frankly, was very underperforming. And I'd been in the organization for quite a while, and this team was in question. And in fact, if you've heard me share the story before, I'll share it again. And for those of you that haven't, they really had planned to close the office that I was put into a leadership role in, because the results in that office were not up to standard. So they were going to pull it into the Holy Grail of Toronto and start managing it from there. And we, working together as a team, were able to actually become number one in the country, create, I think, 75% of the team going to President's Club, and really forming beyond the results piece, because the results were there. Beyond that, creating a culture that had people say, what are they doing? And here's what started it. I sent an invitation when I was given the opportunity of the role. I sent an invitation to every member of the team. And I said, we're going to do things differently. And I'm inviting you to come along for the adventure and be a part of the story that we are going to rewrite. So they had to respond. They had to RSVP. Yes or no, do you want to be a part of this? Thankfully, I'm not sure what I would have done if people had RSVP'd. No, thankfully, people were very excited about that opportunity and possibility, and everyone RSVP'd yes. And then the real work began, and it started with me sitting in our boardroom and saying, I don't know so many things. I've been a successful salesperson. I've never been a sales leader. And so I feel like I need each and every one of you on the team. This is a partnership. This is a collaboration. I want to know your ideas. I want you to share your possibilities. Let's get creative. Let's get innovative. Let's step into curiosity about new ways of doing things. And we tried new ways. We were innovative. And those ideas came from the team. And then I helped get things out of their way so that we could play with these ideas and try them and see what worked and what didn't. And some landed and some didn't. And yet we continue to evolve and grow and expand our success. And that all came from, I would say right now, pure naivety. This was not a strategy that I had to be vulnerable. It just was a knowingness inside that the only way for us to succeed as a team was if we leveraged the strengths of each person on that team, which meant they had to have a voice and they had to know that they were being heard. And so we did that in really creative ways. We studied books. We looked at other organizations. We looked at case studies. We looked at other industries and how they were doing things. We, as an example, at that time, we looked at Starbucks, which was new and innovative in the market. We looked at how could our industry, telecommunications, show up with our customers in ways that hospitality was. And we looked at incorporating things like that into the business. But that came from deep vulnerability, from me being able to be okay with saying, I can't do this alone. I don't know how to do this really. And together we will figure out a way forward. So now flash forward to today, I can look at that moment and all the moments in between then and now and realize that when we step into our deepest truths, which aren't always comfortable to share, then we can bring people along with us because we can create an environment of safety. And people need to feel safe to be their best selves. People need to know you have them, the human being, and then you have them, the person working with you. And that those, again, my favorite word, can coexist. It's interesting because about a month ago, I was speaking to someone and we were talking about vulnerability. We got into this really, really deep conversation about vulnerability. And she said something to me that has really stuck with me. And she said, vulnerability is vital and it's so messy. And we talk about it a lot. But what she said is, I'm wondering, do we allow vulnerability without credibility? Because she said, I think organizations are really, really, really good at vulnerability when you have credibility. So when your results are there, or when you have proven yourself in whatever proven yourself looks like, when you've been with an organization long enough, when you have created connections in a meaningful way. And so I've been sitting with that a lot since that conversation. And I think what is real is that it's easier to be vulnerable when there is a trust relationship. That vulnerability is harder both to give and receive when we don't have some sort of foundation of trust first. And I think that's true in relationships. I think that's true in organizations. I think that trust is the foundation of vulnerability. And then it reminded me of a body of work that I have studied, leveraged, facilitated conversations around for over a decade, and that is the 5 dysfunctions of a team from Patrick Lencioni. And this body of work changes teams because it changes the conversation around trust, which includes vulnerability, and around accountability and around results and around commitment and all of that. So we can do the 5 dysfunctions another time. But the piece of it that comes from that is that we have to build vulnerability-based trust. And then I go to the greatest teacher on this that we've had in our time is Brené Brown, because she has made this possible to have a frame of reference around what causes us to not be vulnerable, which is shame. And where does shame come into play? Well, that's a personal inside body of work. You've got to do the work to really work through that and take the stories away from that and the energy away from that. But I'm back to trust. And so for vulnerability to show up, I really believe that we must have trust at play. And so then vulnerability becomes a conversation about how do we build trust within organizations? How do we build trust within relationships? How do we build trust in our communication internally so that we create a culture and environment that allows vulnerability to be in action, allows people to feel safe in being vulnerable in ways that we can become stronger and more aligned and in harmony, because when that happens, results happen. What I know for sure, back to my first story, is when you create that type of environment, the results will come. That team went from the bad news bears, literally the bad news bears, to number 1 in the country through creating a trusting, vulnerable environment where we could all show up in our greatest strengths and also be able to be open and honest about where we were struggling and where we needed support. That's massive. And I can look at case studies over and over and over again of organizations that created trusting environments. Then people feel safe. Then they can share who you can show up as who you truly are. That is the big thing. We don't want to have masks on. We don't want to try to pretend. We don't want to have to show up as someone that somebody thinks I might be. You want to show up as you, because when you show up as you, that is when the magic happens. That is when the magic happens. Okay, so in leadership, let's define it a little bit deeper. In leadership, it is about having the courage to actually know that you don't have to be in control of the outcome of everything. So then we get into this perfectionism habit. We get into where does imposter syndrome come from? And our willingness as leaders to admit where we need support, to be able to say, hey, that's not my strength. You know what? I'm going to surround myself with great people who have gifts that I do not have. That is a powerful leader. That you know what you need to put around you so that you can achieve the results you want to achieve, so that everyone can step into their strengths, and not everyone has the same strengths. That is what building a powerful leadership team looks like. And that can feel a little bit uncomfortable, because then you're looking at hiring people that are stronger than you in certain areas, that you are going to uplift, that you are going to help create their own success stories. And that is absolutely magical when you see that happen. So then what's the impact? Well, I've shared the impact on my own experiences something that, this is something that I really think we've seen Google do a good job of. That's one example I can think of. It's really interesting because we're sitting here today and I bring up the Google story, but things have changed and evolved there too. So that I think we need to be looking at the news stories because our world has changed, our industries have changed, our leadership is changing. What's needed in that seat is changing. And so this is to me really an evolution. Let's look for, and I would love to hear, I always love the smaller stories because the big brands, we kind of have some expectations there too. And they have the people and resources to be able to create those stories. I would love if you would share with me a story of an organization, a team that who exemplifies this behavior of vulnerability and the results that have come from that. And let's just keep sharing those stories because the ripple effect of looking at other organizations where they've been able to form this safety where vulnerability can succeed. Oh, those are really juicy stories, and I love to hear those. So I'm hoping that someone will share a story with us on that. I also think, I had the great blessing of growing up in a family where I had two very different kinds of parents. One where I would say vulnerability didn't feel safe, and one where vulnerability was expected. And it's interesting if I can just look at that environment even, and then who I felt I could be in the one situation and who I felt I could be in the other. And that evolution of myself came more deeply and richly through the vulnerability-based relationship and curiosity from that person and exploring when things didn't go well. I say that person, that parent. And I think that that's really interesting, just being able to look at itself. So I'm wondering if you could pause and ask yourself, when is a moment that you have been able to show up and speak your truths in a vulnerable way in your lifetime growing up? And how did that feel for you? And what expanded in who you were from that moment or those moments in that relationship? And then fast forward to a working environment situation and think about a leader or even a coworker that you have worked with who has embraced this ability to create a culture that felt safe and real, and where you could do your best work and you could also share where you needed extra support or share something you were going through, and you knew that that would not be met with judgment. Because our greatest opportunity is to show up in a non-judgmental way. If we could shift anything in the world that would have the most massive impact, if you could shift anything in your own life that would have the most massive impact, it's that one word, and that's judgment. And the reason we don't feel safe and the reason we aren't willing to be vulnerable is because judgment is a rampant behavior in our world right now. We judge people, we judge races, we judge sexes, we judge everything. We have been taught to judge, and it has become absolutely a pandemic in our world. And then we judge ourselves. And that's where it all starts, is because we're judging ourselves on social media posts. We're judging ourselves on what someone else's success looks like. We're judging ourselves every day. And then we turn around and we judge others. And in a judgment-filled society, it's pretty hard to be vulnerable. It's pretty hard to believe you can show up as your real self and not be met with something that doesn't feel safe. And so a practice that I have is NJO, non-judgmental observer, that I'm going to show up in situations and I am going to practice not judging what people say, what they share, who they are. And it starts with not judging myself, not judging that I am not good at something, or I'm not the best at something, or I said the wrong thing, or I did the wrong thing, just, or that I'm not enough, or that I'm not worthy. We're worthy. We're whole as we are right now in this very moment. And so I think that is a great practice to play with. And as you play with it, you will notice how much time you spend there. Because that was the biggest shock for me practicing this, is like, whoa, and there it is, and there it is, and there it is again. Oh my God, there it is again. And the next call, and the next call, and oh, I'm in it again. This isn't because it's been, a natural state of how we have operated in North America. It will take some practice, and I'm practicing it, and I continue to practice it and raise self-awareness and consciousness, and practice and raise self-awareness and consciousness. And that's an ongoing sort of circle of arrival, or just let's call it evolution, because I think until the day I am not on this earth any longer, I will still be practicing that. So let's all step up and practice stepping into non-judgmental observer. So I've got 3 practical steps to leave you with. Number 1 is really what I just talked about. Start with self-awareness. The more that you can be aware of the environments that you're creating, and also your own ability to go first. Because if you're not willing to be vulnerable, then the person with you, the conversation, the team, it's not going to breed others being willing to be vulnerable. So go first. And number 2 is practice openness and communication. Really make a conscious effort to share things that you're experiencing, share your truth from your own perspective, and be open to other people doing the same. And then encourage vulnerability in others. Create environments where you're curious, where you're deeply compassionate, where you're asking how people are and truly holding space to receive the answers and to sit in support of those things. And remember, it's a practice. To what I just said, this is a practice. And the more that you embrace it, the more it will become natural. And then you'll evolve to your next state. And then you'll practice more and you'll evolve more. And so I think as I wrap up this, it's so worth it. It's so worth it in the boardroom. It's so worth it in your family room. It's so worth it with your spouse. It's so worth it with your teams. Being vulnerable, being open, being real, and creating an environment where others can as well. Creating environments of trust. And also, this is back to what we are here to talk about on this podcast. Ambitious, awakened, and aligned. You can still be ambitious and driven and working towards big goals, and be vulnerable and real and authentic and aligned. This is the goal. In our awakening, in our best selves, in our most authentic selves, we are achieving the greatest goals and dreams of our life while we're still being able to be authentic, vulnerable, and real and true. Okay, until next time, practice. And I can't wait to hear the stories evolve.